All right, Joffrey. So for
Sir.
today's topic, I think we might ruffle a few feathers. I think we might make some people angry,
Right.
but we'll try to walk through it as best as we can.
Let's do it. Let's do it.
And it is actually,
Huh.
is empathy a sin? So this is going to be about Christianity.
Okay.
It's going to be about compassion,
Okay.
and it's going to be about the truth within the culture wars that are going on. So I'll sort of frame it up for you.
Okay. Yeah.
We have this overreaching culture war in the country right now,
Gotcha.
right? It's pretty clear between Republicans, Democrats, progressives, conservatives. And it's unfortunate because, this terminology, it kind of stereotypes large groups of people.
For sure.
Right? Within these ideologies, there's a lot more nuance.
Right.
There are a lot more people that are actually in between. There are a lot more people that have, separate viewpoints that may lean more right or more left on a certain topic. But unfortunately, from a media perspective, we're starting to categorize people like this. And because we're categorizing people like this, we have this culture war clash. Now, this same culture war clash is happening within Christianity. And it has produced this word that we're going to address today called toxic empathy.
Toxic empathy. I don't even know how those go together, but okay.
I'm going to try to describe this for you.
Toxic empathy. Is that
So,
possible?
Is it possible?
Is it possible?
Let's find out.
Let's see.
So within Christianity, you have the conservative Christians. Now, for the people that need to frame things within the media stereotypes, which I hate, but we're going to do that for the sake of
just
argument
for the
right
sake
now.
of the conversation, yeah.
They're like the right-leaning or conservative Christians.
Okay.
Then you have the left-leaning or liberal Christians, right? The progressive Christians who believe in empathy, almost to a certain extent, empathy at all costs, right? That love should be your first step forward when it comes to major issues like the LGBTQ community, immigration, social justice.
Okay.
Whereas the
Hot stuff there.
whereas the conservative community, their belief is that you should lead with truth first. That the Bible makes these truths very clear, and regardless of people's feelings on the topic or where they may lean, we should just be following God's word to the T. And their belief is that this level of empathy, or this exaggerated level of empathy where you're sort of ignoring biblical truths, according to them, in favor of trying to love these people and letting things go and letting things slide. This is from their point of view.
Right.
They're viewing it as letting things go, letting things slide, letting biblical truths go, and they feel that level of empathy is toxic.
Oh,
So that is
Wow.
toxic empathy as best as I can describe it.
wow. Okay. My goodness. So I'm hearing you say that there's a war going on, and it's like people on both sides, Christians with certain political angles, are basically taking a stance. I'm hearing that there's a group that's saying, hey man, there's a threshold, I guess, for your empathy, or there's a limit and you're doing too much, so that's it. And I guess when it goes past that limit, it becomes toxic.
Or at least
'Cause
that's
when
the
I
word
think
of
of-
the year.
Yeah, when I think of toxic, I forgot my ex's name. No, I'm just kidding. when I think of toxic, I'm just like, that's not good for me, right? I shouldn't drink that drink or eat that food or whatever the case, or be with this person. So toxic empathy. I think I'm chewing what you're giving me. I think I'm biting something there.
Let me give you a little bit more framework,
for
just
sure.
a tiny bit more. So conservative theology
Yeah.
emphasizes biblical authority, moral absolutes. It's kind of what I was saying earlier, where like your feelings don't matter. It's either black or white. There's no gray.
Right.
And then, consistency within the doctrine. They want to have consistency within the doctrine. Then the progressive Christianity emphasizes compassion, social justice, and sort of that lived experience. I would even say, like how things feel, what feels right, what's the right thing to do based on how the situation feels. Do you see any issue with either angle, either the conservative theology or the progressive theology?
For me, when I think of these things, especially with dogmatic anything, can sometimes be problematic for me. So if I heard someone say this the other day, they were talking about Bible's infallible.
Invaluable.
Or infallible.
Oh,
So,
infallible. Yeah.
hmm
Does no wrong. Yep.
so you know, and that person will stand on that, right? Um, and it sounds good to say that, and it's like, okay, well, what do they actually mean by that? You know, they mean that every word, every line that someone reads from that particular Bible,
Mm-hmm.
that they should just hold on to it, believe it, and stuff like that. But then you take a step back and you're like, oh, wait a minute, um, this Bible, they use these manuscripts, and this was actually taken out, or this was actually added in, and then they translate. It's like someone can say something that sounds good to the ear, and then someone else can look at that thing and say, well, though that sounds good, there's a few micro holes maybe in that. But no one wants to say something like that because you're going to sound like a heretic or something. So when I think of, the both sides,
Mm-hmm.
I think anything, if you do too much of anything, it's going to be a problem. So I think while there's some Bible authority for the conservative, moral absolutes, doctrinal consistency, it's like, yeah, but I don't know all the time, all the way. Even with compassion, social justice, lived experience, and I think you had mentioned like feeling,
Yep.
and that's like true. Like, yeah, it's similar. It's like all the way. If I always feel, sometimes I can feel something that maybe if I act on that feeling, it won't be the best for me. So I think on both sides, there are problems if it just goes to the extreme. So that's how I, excuse me, that's how I kind of see it. When I think about it with toxic empathy and how that kind of gets, in there. Man, I think it always is about something else. Like I looked at a clip or two about, I think the author, I think her name, who put out the book last year.
Okay.
Elizabeth Stuckley or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And just from hearing her, I don't know, cause I feel like there's conservative theology that makes sense. There's liberal theology that makes sense. Then there's conservative theology that doesn't make sense.
Yep.
And liberal theology that doesn't make sense. And I think where they may be coming from with this, I saw a few clips, so I can't even give a full, I guess, understanding of it. But from the few clips that I saw this person speaking, I was like, it sounds like they're saying something else while they're saying this. I think it's like called a implicature or something like that.
Something about what they're implying when they're speaking.
Yeah, it's like I'm actually like saying this. I'm saying it A B C D, but I
Yeah.
actually mean 1 2 3 4.
Yeah.
So that's some of my thoughts when I think of it, for both sides, and then thinking about, okay, what are we really trying to get at here? What do we really mean by this?
Yeah. What I'm sort of getting from what
Mhm.
you're saying is both sides don't necessarily have the whole truth. And if you lean too far to one side, you're missing something.
Yeah.
Another thing that you made me think of when you were talking was, if you're dogmatic and you're very conservative, what if your interpretation of the Bible isn't correct? What if you're taking verses out of context, right?
True.
This has been a huge controversy, especially during like the Protestant Reformation. This has been a huge controversy even today with media, with the Bible, where somebody will use a verse to say one thing, but then when you look at the context and when you look at the whole chapter, that's not really the point that was being made.
Yeah.
And we see it outside of the Bible in media when people take things out of context. So
Yeah.
that's my issue maybe on the conservative side, is if you're taking things out of context and maybe you don't have the right perception of the truth.
Could you say the same on the? I think on the liberal side
You can
too,
make,
right? 'Cause you can be
you can make a
dogmatic
similar
about-
argument on the
Yeah.
liberal side, right?
Sure,
Like if
sure.
you're going off of feelings, how much can you trust your feelings when we are being given a structure by the Bible on what the world is and how things are, because we can't always trust our own feelings, right? Because of our sinful nature.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
one side has human error, in my opinion, by putting too much trust in feelings and too much trust in the trends and what's popular with man. And then the other side, they're putting their faith in how they're interpreting the Bible, but
Right.
they're not always right, and they're putting their trust in their human understanding. So
See that?
I can see some issues on both sides.
Yeah. I think that's where it's like, okay, what are they, what are they really? Because if I can't really if I can't understand, what you're kind of getting at, and you can't at least try to understand what I'm getting, or if I can't try for you,
Mm-hmm.
then there's a problem. There's a problem with us. Like, why can't we come to the middle? Even if we both still disagree to a certain extent, there should be something from your understanding that I can gain and grasp, And I think some of the issue is like what, when they say truth always leads.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, okay, well, what do you mean by that? And I think this is where I guess a little conflation happens, where they come together. If truth always leads, then I have to take into account someone's lived experience. I have to take into account compassion. If Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life, how did Jesus actually move? How did he navigate? How actually was he? What are the things that he said? Because I would hear arguments where people would say, let's isolate what Jesus said. We're not going to count Paul and all the, So and that's an interesting argument too. But even if we just looked at Jesus's life, right, we can see that both of the things that they're saying, they come together.
Yeah. Jesus
kinda
always led with the
coincide.
truth, but in the most loving ways.
Yeah, so that they really coincide, and it's just like, was Jesus a toxic empath person? Like, did he exhibit toxic empathy? I wonder.
Yeah, I would say, kind of depending on how people would look at it, for the most part, there were times when people who would probably lean more progressive wouldn't like some of the things that he says and the hard lines that he drew in the sand that he did not cross. And then the people that were conservative would have probably been the Pharisees that didn't like the fact that he associated with certain people, loved certain people, and moved in certain ways that wasn't becoming of sort of this idea in everybody's minds of what the Messiah was.
Right.
So I think, people always want to say that if Jesus lived today, that they would follow him and they would love him. But the truth is that if Jesus lived today, he would cause a divide in this country. There would be people that wouldn't like the way that he moved, right, on the conservative side. And then there would be people on the progressive side that wouldn't like the hard lines in the sand that he drew for truth.
Definitely.
And, in the New Testament, Jesus says, I didn't come to unite. I came to, divide, bring a sword. And I think he would do the same thing today. Sort of like inevitable for humanity to sort of like take different sides on different topics. And it's largely based on their culture, their upbringing. In some cases, if people were brought up, too harshly conservative or too harshly liberal, they flip in the opposite direction.
Like when they get older?
Yeah, when they get older. If they were too conservative growing up, they'll flip the opposite direction and rebel. If things were too progressive, they may hit a wall in their lives when things start to fall apart, because going off of feelings and being too open to everything leads to destruction without, Jesus's line in the sand. And then they flip the opposite direction, and then they get too conservative because these ideologies sort of saved them. And you see people often overlook how much their culture, their upbringing, and their life experiences influence the way they see things. And that's the reason why they have a hard time seeing the other side of the story.
Man, you said some things, and I'm like, whoo. I've seen people grow up in conservative households, get older, but they stay that way. And I've seen people grow up in conservative households, grow up, and they do the flip that you're talking about.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering if, and I think how we grow up plays such an important role in our development. I'm wondering if a toxic upbringing leads to that, some type of toxic understanding and
100%, in my opinion.
Output when you get older, right? Because I'm thinking about it, and I'm just like, I've seen both of those camps. Someone grow up pretty liberal and they stay that way, but it was how they had it growing up.
Yeah.
And someone, on the other side, and they flip or whatever the case may be, and I'm just like, So I've seen some of that, and I've also seen people keep it and stay based on how it might have been formed
More
when they got
people
older.
tend to keep it than not. People,
Mm.
they think that their mind is so free, but then people from the South tend to like similar music and dress a similar way and have similar, tastes in terms of what's fun and lifestyle.
Yeah,
People from the North, right? Like they have all these similarities,
for
and
sure.
everybody think their mind is so free and that they're definitely choosing out of their knowledge of everything going on, but then they're very similar to their neighbors in the places where they grew up, and they think very similar to their neighbors. I mean, look at the way like the states vote. Look at the way the
Right,
cultural
right.
divide is in this country,
Still,
where you can pick a state and you have an 80% chance of picking the political ideology of the person within
right,
that state.
right.
The people
It's
aren't
crazy.
as free thinking as they believe they are.
Right. That's a wild thought. If you really think about it.
Yeah, it's tough because as humans, we really want that freedom of choice.
Mm-hmm.
But I believe that from a biblical standpoint, you need to understand why you're here. You need to understand the way the world works. You need to understand what the gift that God has for you. And only then can your mind be free to make choices. Without God, without the truth, you are a slave to your upbringing and to your life circumstances. And we're on the topic of Christians. So it may say, well, how can you say that? These people are Christians. God says a lot of people are going to come to the gate saying that they knew him, that they cast out demons in his name, that they did all these works for him. And God's going to say, I never knew you. And a lot of these people who are very taking extremes within religion and taking these stances that have negative outcomes, right? The fruit we bear shows who we are. So
Yeah.
these people that are bearing poor fruit, who are claiming Christianity, who are drawing these hard lines in the sand for their ideologies, their mind isn't as free to think as they think it is.
Yeah.
And who knows, they may not be, who am I to judge, but they should
Yeah.
probably take another look at their understanding of Christianity.
Yeah, I hear that, man. I hear that. That line you said, without God, you can be like a slave to your upbringing, right? Without
Yeah.
God, without truth.
Your upbringing, your circumstances.
Do you think that with God, someone can also be a slave to their upbringing and their circumstances as well? I'm wondering.
Like if they grew up within Christianity?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, 100%. Because when you use that idea that many Christians aren't true Christians, right? Because they're just Christians because of culture. You see a lot with Catholicism, right? You see Catholicism tends to be cultural for a lot of people. They have their baby, get baptized. They go to the Easter ceremonies, but they're not Catholic. They're not Catholic in between. If it's not Lent, if it's not a special occasion, they're not that Catholic, because Catholic is cultural. It took over so much of the world, and there's so many cultures where people grow up Catholic that it's a part of their culture to be Catholic, but they're not very religious. So with Christianity, is it possible to grow up in a Christian household, right, and still be closed-minded? 100%, because humans are communal. They always want community.
Right.
And this is the reason why cultish behavior is a big part of being human. You get enough vegans together, they'll talk about being vegan. CrossFitters were annoying people in the fitness community for a long time by always talking about CrossFit, always dressing like CrossFit, always wearing CrossFit on their sleeve. And there are a lot of Christians who are the same way. They want a group to identify with. They've chosen Christianity,
Right.
and they're like hardcore Christian to the max, wearing it on the outside, but they're compensating for a lot of things. They grew up in that way. They're, being overly dogmatic based on what their church or what their pastor believes,
Right,
versus
right.
finding a relationship with God. So 100%, you can be raised believing anything and be raised closed-minded and be a slave to something.
That's real. That's real. That's real.
So it's tough out
Yeah.
there being a human being, man.
No, it is. It is. It is. It is. It is. And speaking of just some of the things you spoke of, I remember sometimes in my experience where I was very just dogmatic about certain things. I had to apologize for some posts I put out on Facebook. I remember saying like, man, this is when I was like way off the rocker. I was like, man, um, if a lady like wears something like like you shouldn't like wear something because it's gonna like entice
Send the
a
wrong
guy or
message.
something,
Entice the guy.
with some foolishness like that. I look back and I was like, that's crazy that I would say that. Like like it's about like make it an issue about her,
Mm.
what she wears, and whatever happens to me, it's her fault. I was like, actually no. However you interpret whatever she's doing, that's really on you. Now
Yeah.
people can really go into but, and I remember also saying like and we shouldn't watch like Black Panther and stuff because there's like spiritualism and I was just really yeah, and that was around the time when Black Panther had come out and it was just
Yeah.
so I know what it's like to kind of use God to really be so strong about certain things, but then also be very wrong about them as
Mhm.
well. So even when I think of toxic empathy, I wonder if the people who are even because they're using God to say, man, you all over there, you guys are using God to make empathy toxic. But I wonder if this person's using God to say that these people are using God to make empathy toxic. I'm just wondering.
But
Yeah.
you have a good point there because
Mhm.
some people will use God for things that make them uncomfortable because it's not in line with their culture,
Mm.
right? So if you're more conservative Christian
Mm-hmm.
and something falls outside of your culture and your beliefs, you attack them, but you use God as like the authority, right? You
Right.
want to
Right.
hold
Right.
on to some authority to make them wrong,
Mhm.
and that's the authority that you have within your culture. So you use
Yeah.
that.
So that's pretty toxic. That's pretty toxic. I know there were some topics too. Some like things that if we placed it against toxic empathy, how do they line up?
Well,
Right.
social justice before we
Okay.
started,
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
one you wanted to touch on.
Oh, true.
I
Okay. Yeah.
wasn't
Yeah.
I wasn't as comfortable with social justice,
Right.
but
Right.
it
Right.
is huge. And it's not that I
Right.
wasn't comfortable with it. It's just from like a knowledge base.
Got you. Got you.
Um, so I think social justice is a huge one
Yeah.
because social
Okay.
justice requires empathy.
Mm.
But the one thing that I will say, like,
Mhm.
touching on social justice,
Mhm.
is the idea for toxic empathy was that empathy becomes dangerous when it overrides biblical moral judgment. That's something that I put down here from like the conservative side.
Mm.
So then when it comes to social justice,
Judgment.
how does that apply? So when you
Yeah.
have social issues, is it possible to have so much empathy for this minority group or for, the LGBTQ community
Mhm.
or, this immigrant group? Is it
Mm.
possible to be so empathetic to people that, in the eyes of other people, are violating either the moral code of the Bible or they're violating the laws of this country?
Mm.
Is it toxic to be too empathetic to those people?
Mm. Man, and I that question, I don't know if I could just say yes or no. The reason why it gets a little cloudy, a little nebulous, is because you know, um, I don't know if we can mix like law and like morality.
You mean like government law?
Yeah, law, government law,
Yeah.
and moral law. But I don't know if we can mix those two and say, if I'm too empathetic for someone who's morally done something that doesn't conflict with government law, I don't know what does being too empathetic really look like. And then if someone does something against the law repeatedly and stuff like that, should I just let them go because
You should be
of their
forgiving.
background? That's true. Now, to a certain extent, because there are laws in place, and some of the laws are flawed. That's kind of like the reality of it. Like the laws are flawed. So if you have someone who sold some crack versus someone who sold cocaine, you know, those laws were in place by Clinton, by Reagan,
That's the social justice
by
point of view right there.
right, by Nixon. So there's laws in place that are like, okay, well, we know that this is going to be sold more in this community, so let's give them mandatory minimums. Let's do like 100-to-1 ratio, where like if they sell a little bit of this, they're going to get like more time than someone who has a little bit of powder cocaine. So it's just really crazy. So that's like one slice of it. If someone, because of their environment, is they are repeated offenders, but are we maybe give them programs to help them to get out of that? Are what is the society doing? Okay, now that people who are of the majority have put in their hand in the marijuana pot. Okay, now it's free, it's legal now. So we go here, we smoke it, it's all good. But what about Buddy who was selling a nickel bag and now he's in jail for a couple of years? And it's just, to me, very strange. If I try to say, well, I can't be, I have to like put a governor on my empathy for people who are going through more than just what meets the eye. Like it's kind of like their back is against the wall. Now, should you break the law? Of course not. I think we need to look at some more of what's happening and why.
Can I touch on a point that you're starting to dig to?
For sure.
I feel like the direction you're headed in is one side of the argument is looking at people breaking the law and they just want to close the book on it. And what you're getting at, and what social justice sometimes tries to attempt, but they don't necessarily do, is you're looking at the why behind it. Like, what led them down this path, and can we address that?
Yeah, to a certain extent, for sure. And also depends on what it is too.
Yeah.
To a certain extent. And I think that if someone says, well, I'm just gonna like nothing happens to this person because they're a minority, right? That we might have to be careful of, because and I think that's what one of the arguments are. Well, that's where that empathy could be toxic because they're just so forgiving. I think that it should be equity, right? If this person does something and that person does something, if they look totally different, you should give them the same, whatever, whether it be a year in jail or whatever, or some type of not course, but like community situation. I don't even like the idea of jail, but some type of community situation where they have to do hours or whatever the case. But it shouldn't be just because of this person's skin color that they get more time, and I think that's where it just becomes an issue. I think toxic empathy, I'm not sure if someone in those cases, it's so like nuanced. You just have to really carefully look at what's happening.
Case by case basis.
Yeah, it's case by case. But there are some generalities like, this is just what happens to this community, out here. And laws were in place by our presidents. Laws were in place by our government to stick it to these people.
Well, if you look at Jesus' example, there were attempts to merge church and state through Jesus, right? He walked away multiple times when people wanted him to take hard political stances, when people wanted him to be, the leader of, this revolution that was going to happen under the Roman Empire, when people challenged him about, hey, should we even be paying taxes now that you're here? And Jesus said, whose face is on the coin, render unto Caesar what is Caesar's. Jesus's circumstances oftentimes were case by case basis, right? He didn't have broad strokes or broad laws that conflicted with what the Roman Empire was doing. Yeah. He helped individuals. And now, one of the things that I always think of when this topic sort of comes up, I have a critique of both sides. So you have the conservatives who just want to close the book on people based on the political law or based on what they feel is moral law, right? And that's too extreme, because Jesus always took things on a case by case basis.
Mm.
And then you have on the other side this empathy for people that have gone through things. Jesus' forgiveness. We should give them more and more tries to get out of this. And these people came from these people immigrated from like a poor country, so we should allow them in our country, even if a small percentage of them are committing crimes. They're not the majority, right? You always see that immigration thing where you have 100
Yeah,
migrants across the
immigration's
border.
tricky. Yeah.
Two of the 100 migrants commit a crime. Everybody's like, we shouldn't have people cross the border because those two migrants committed a crime. And then people are like, well, what about the other 98 that found beautiful lives like in this country?
Right.
And when I look at these arguments, and we could touch on immigration more in a second,
Immigration's tricky.
but the thing that I want to touch on high level when I look at these arguments,
yeah.
I have the critique of the conservative side, closing the book on people, but I have a bigger critique of the progressive side. And I
Okay.
see it in things like abortion and things like that, where
Abortion's
one
another
side is like absolutely no abortions, the other side is like we should allow abortions. If you look at the root of it, if you're a Christian,
Yeah.
again, using the example of abortions, right? It's like the ultimate critique. One side is saying no abortions whatsoever.
Yeah.
The other side is saying allow abortions, right? And
Right.
both of them are within the Christian community. If Christians as a whole were to go to the root cause, if they were to go to these communities, teach women the value of sex and relationships, teach men how to respect women. These communities that over-index on abortions are in poverty. Help bring those communities out of poverty while you're teaching, the young boys and young girls in the communities. Set up adoption centers to bring these kids into homes, right? Like you do all these things through love, through teaching, through admonishment. You can reduce the rate of abortions more than putting a lot of stop abortions, because a lot of stop abortions means that person goes to another state to abort, or they do it in a very dangerous and unhealthy way. But if you address the root cause without getting in the politics, you can reduce the rate. And so I have a very unpopular theory about how governments, could be run, and it's based on my travels in Europe, and I call this theory, it's the Amsterdam theory. This was also a theory that was duplicated in a TV show called The Wire. And this Amsterdam theory is...
It's the HBO show, that one?
Yeah.
Oh, gotcha.
If there is a separation between church and state, if you keep your religious morals separate from political ideologies, you could essentially set up an environment where, because people are going to sin, people are going to do dirt, they can do that in this section over here, and because they're allowed to do it in this section over here, the rest of the city is clean. And so what I mean by that is like you go to Amsterdam has prostitution, it has drug sales for low levels of like marijuana and psychedelics and things that have landed people in prison for 20 years in the 1980s and 1990s, the war on drugs. And all this stuff is legal there, but on the streets of Amsterdam, there's nobody standing on street corners soliciting. There are no drug dealers. There's very little crime or robbery. Why? Because there's a section of the city over here that families and religious people don't have to go to, where the dirt is being done, and then the rest of the city is clean. And so what happens is that instead of having this constant battle and fight to stop sin through government and political means, you have the people that have the ability to spread love if they want to reduce the sin, but you don't leverage the government to do so, if that makes sense. I'm not saying that's right. I'm only presenting that as a way to challenge people who are drawing a hard line on either side, right?
Man,
because it's interesting. People really want their religion to be tied to their politics, and they really want their government to impose their religion on all people. And that's tough, and that's actually a topic we're going to get to in a different podcast.
Yeah,
but it's tough.
That's some good stuff, and yeah, if we lived under a theocracy, that's okay, right? If God is governing us, but we're under something different, like and I think that idea, if we were to, have that happening, it's, I guess, like Nevada, right, where you can go to certain places and
a little bit too widespread for my taste in Nevada. I'll be
You know,
honest with you. Yeah, it's a
where you
little bit.
can get
That's
certain,
very libertarian, a little bit overboard.
right?
So I
But
mean,
I'm just saying, like, I can see
yeah,
how in certain, I guess, in certain aspects, you can do that. But yeah, here, it's so intertwined,
yeah.
the politics and religion. But I can see that idea like working, and I guess toxic empathy won't really be a thing if that were to be the
Well, our
case.
country was founded on Judeo-Christian values, right? The Protestants. So that's the reason why the conservatives,
Heavy on that.
yeah, that's the reason why the conservative Christians tend to feel like they have a stance on mixing church and state because
For
of
sure, we know what
the
they
morals
tried to
this
do.
country was, founded on. So
They tried to found it on that, but there's
yeah,
no way. There's no way for me today. I could be like, we were founded on that.
yeah, because then it quickly pivoted to slavery. So whatever.
Exactly. And it's just like there's no way. But immigration, when I think of immigration and the concept of toxic empathy, and I know you mentioned like the 2 versus the 98. There's that general principle of, okay, letting people come in and or not, and I guess they're trying to make the argument that empathy will become too toxic. It become toxic, right?
Yeah, by
If we're just
loving everybody and
letting
letting
everybody
everybody in,
right.
you jeopardize the citizens that are here by giving access to criminals. So, like, to summarize the argument, the
Right.
best that I can, is essentially you have on the one side immigration, love everybody, let everybody in, but then on the opposite side you have some real realities that the progressive people aren't addressing. The realities are that the border's being weaponized by the cartel, where they're making just as much money by shuttling people across the border, for sale and trafficking people as they are from drugs because the border's so wide open. You have the risk of terrorism that the cartels, because they operate off of money and they operate in the gray and the illegal, that any terrorist tomorrow can show up to Mexico and pay a cartel member to hustle them across the border. We've had, spies and people enter this country and terrorists enter this country going that route. And then on the opposite side, the conservatives who are just like, no, shut the border, don't let anybody in. Nobody's addressing the fact that our country has evolved economically in a way that we have a heavy reliance on immigrants. And it's been said multiple times that there should be a visa that's easier to access, that could even be temporary, that should be given to these immigrants so it's easier for them to cross the border, so they don't have to cross illegally, so they can be recorded and contribute to the economy and contribute to taxes and be hired and take these jobs that Americans won't take. And so the problem is that people are taking extremes to this argument. One side of the argument, let everybody across, increases danger within the country. Other argument, don't let anybody across, tends to be racist, and there's some racist undertones and damage to the economy. And the reality is that both sides are ignoring a factual, non-emotional conclusion. Get together, create a visa for this category of people that wants to enter the country and that the country relies on, but neither side will do it because they're so stuck on their political ideologies and they want their followers to be stuck under same said ideologies, so they won't come to the table and bring things together. They need that divide to happen to win votes, and that same divide is carrying over into religion as well. So it's a tricky topic.
It is. It is. And when I think of myself and my family, and most people, a lot of people in our country, just being the products of immigrants, it can just be very tricky because I don't know who can really say. Cool. I don't know who can really say that, even if there is a visa, that we let this person in, we don't let that person in, which, they have a certain process right now, which I would hear of people from different countries 3 times, 4 times trying to get over.
Ours is one of the toughest.
And it's just, it's crazy. It's like, well,
our tourist B visa.
Why are they getting denied for? They're definitely not even coming over here.
It's tough.
To whatever, stay and da-da-da. So for me, it's an issue in which I think that they can definitely be more understanding and letting people come to this country, like in freaking Ellis Island. Like,
Yeah,
you want
it's
to
a
let
it's a
people
one
come
size
over,
fits all. To the point you're making, it's a
you
one
know?
size fits all visa. It's not taking into account the different levels of people that want to enter.
Just come. I mean, 1800s when they hit them with the Ellis Island,
Yeah,
it wasn't everybody was coming.
free for all.
Yeah, so it's like, wait, did we forget about that or
Oh,
something?
a lot of people
Or,
have forgotten about
you
how
know,
this country
now it's like, oh my gosh, they're killers and murderers. Well, a lot of people who came over from Ellis Island started some pretty powerful underground syndicates that I don't think we like to really discuss.
created some wealthy people today. That's why we don't
Um,
discuss it.
Yeah, you know. So it's just like, okay, what is this really all about?
Yeah.
You know, what's it all about? So,
So I mean, to sort of like bring this home,
yeah, yeah.
I think the core idea, that we're getting at is that when it comes to Christian ethics, truth, yes. Compassion, yes.
Right.
But this idea of toxic empathy
Mm.
is coming from one side that is drawing too hard of a line in the sand, and they've lost the compassion part. But they are, at least in my opinion, on a case-by-case basis, they're not entirely untrue with this idea of toxic empathy. Because on the other hand, you have people who are leading with this idea of empathy, and they're leaving behind biblical principle and truth, right? And so that there needs to be a balance on both sides. Is kind of like,
Yeah.
the key point.
But I'm wondering if it's really empathy. Like, I think if someone is, really leading with empathy or compassion, it just, to me, reflects what Christ did, and he knew his limits. He knew when, hey, okay, I gotta put a pause on hanging out with y'all today. I gotta go rest. I gotta do this. And I think he was wise in how he exhibited what he did. I think for me, what I'm seeing is they're making this argument because they want other things to not happen, which are not the real thing. It's like, okay, I don't want people to be in these LGBT relationships, so I'm gonna say, hey, if people are allowing them, if someone doesn't believe in someone's sexual orientation, but they're still serving them, like, if I do make the cake for you, okay, that's toxic empathy. I was like, well, is it, or do they just want to get some money? Like does them serving this group of people and not agreeing with whatever their orientation is, does that mean that this person is doing toxic empathy just because they are showing compassion in a sense, or catering to them?
Well, to add context on what you're talking about, because this is a subject we started before the podcast. So to add context around what you're talking about, before the podcast started, we were talking about how there were conservative people within the gay community, and that there were liberal people outside of the gay community, and how, if somebody walks into a cake shop and they want their wedding cake, right, you would have these conservative Christians that would deny making the wedding cake for the gay couple. This is a classic argument from years ago. And then you have like the progressive Christians who would make the cake for the gay couple. And then it's like, who's right and who's wrong, And that's where one thing that I think Jesus brought in the New Testament in terms of the teachings that he had for us is how much intention matters, right? So I'm not going to attempt to be God and say what's right or wrong in terms of making the cake for the gay couple. But what I will say is, to the point that you were making earlier, if the intention of that person is, they're getting married anyway, I can't stop them, and I need the money to make this cake, right? Like, is that toxic empathy, right? It's because they have nothing to do with that wedding or with that couple. They didn't condone it. They didn't push them to do that. They're just running a business and they're making a cake. And then the other side, sure, if you can deny service to anyone you want, it is what it is. Yeah. But there are certain stances that people take, certain things that people do that can be viewed as toxic empathy. But I think intention matters. What was your intention behind this?
Got you.
You're not necessarily condoning what this person is doing, but you are showcasing love and empathy.
Right. So then it goes back to even when we talk about a little bit of social justice, or somebody who may be a repeat offender for something, that intention is not just saying, okay, yeah, okay, because of this, let's just let him go. But it's like, okay, what's happening here? What's going on? Like, why are you back here? How can we shift what's happening with your life, right? How can we best show up for you? So I think intention is important, and looking to Jesus' example is something that we definitely need to do, and I'm praying that we will a balanced way of seeing, Christ's example, man.
Yeah.
I think one of the verses that we had brought up was that I remember seeing was the that Micah 6:8, and I think that can apply to all. I think it's, what is it? It's love. I always get this wrong. Walk humbly before God. So love mercy, do justice. I always mix this works up. Walk humbly before your God kind of vibe.
Yeah.
Talks about really having compassion, but it also gives this understanding of walking with God. So it's not just, you don't just lean to one side and you're a yes person for everything.
Yeah.
But it's a balance. It's intentional.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Yeah. And then there's like a closing thought here.
Yeah.
I guess I would say is this notice Christianity historically has taught both of these things: a radical level of compassion and a moral conviction. And I think that's where this conflict arises. And I think the challenge for everyone is to try to find the balance.
Yeah, cool, man. Well, we've ended, right? Second episode.
Yeah. And as we mentioned previous, we've got more controversial topics.
Sure,
we'll try to work our way through next time.
For sure. I think we said the next one is going to be on, you mentioned it, being under that type of government.
We'll the merger of church and state
Okay.
that people want. Yeah.
Okay.
We'll talk about that next time.
Cool stuff. Let's do it.
All right, man.
All right. Yeah.